I'm excited to do this series of seminars though, because this is a chance to make good on this downtime, right? For us and for
Yeah.
other artists who are wanting to improve their game. And so I don't know how much detail Gabe has gone into with you about this, but we're going to be handing out exercises and then 3 days later grading those um, to the people that tune in and then, pay for our webinar. So this is actually going to give them a chance to have active participation. So we're going to talk for 90 minutes, look at whatever images that you choose to share. I'd love to see your drawing process, your thinking process, how you use references in your drawing process, your inspirations, and then your tattoo process, a little bit of step-by-step. This can include video or just stills if you want. Any of this stuff is helpful. Time-lapse is great. But at the end of this whole thing, we're going to have some take-homes for people. Like, this is what we're hoping that you're getting out of this whole thing. These are the important, concepts that Bob is talking about with all of his, tattoo designs here. And here's a challenge for you. Here's an arm or a back or whatever. And this is the drawing that you need to do. And you're going to try to accomplish these particular goals with it. And in 3 days, Bob and I are going to get back together for another half hour and look at each one for a couple minutes and talk about it.
It sounds cool.
So this is to give people their money's worth, and also they'll have like 2 or 3 days to do the project. It's going to give them a really good way to, use their time, and they can obsess over this exercise and not say, I didn't really have time to get to it, and really try to push themselves. And then when they finally are able to get back in the tattoo studio again, they'll have something new that they can try out and feel confident because they've had a chance to try it out on paper and get feedback on that and, see exactly how to apply that to their tattooing.
Cool, man.
So let's hear a little bit about your history as an artist. I know you started tattooing a little, what to some people would be considered later in the game, but that obviously has not been a setback for you. But clearly you already had like artistic preferences that you came into the game with. I'd like to hear just about what's the unique mix that made Bob Tyrrell when he started tattooing.
Yeah, I was like 34 when I actually started, but I was late getting tattooed as well. I was like almost 30 when I got my first tattoo, but I wanted one since I was 19, and I used to actually go check out tattoo shops in my 20s and thought I had to pick something off the wall back then. This is early 90s, but finally I was turning 30. I'm like, I'm getting tattooed. I'm not waiting. So I went to the closest shop to my house, which was one of the worst shops in town. And, got tattooed, wasn't that good. But I was thrilled to have a tattoo, and I went, this is on my bicep, like a lot of us start first tattoo outside of your bicep. So then I wanted to get another one on my other bicep because I'm all about symmetry, I'm a big symmetry guy. And so I found Eternal Tattoos, where I ended up apprenticing. He opened up a second shop right by my house here, and I happened to drive by and see it. So I went in there. This 18-year-old kid turned out first guy I talked to. But he showed me some drawings of skulls he did and stuff. So I had him do my second tattoo, and then he was a cool kid, and he was, tattoos were okay. They're pretty light, and I ended up getting them reworked later by Paul Booth and Mario Barth, who did my right sleeve. But anyway, he did both my upper arms, and during that time, I discovered tattoo magazines, and I was like, "Holy shit, man!" And really early on, I saw an article on Paul Booth in the Tattoo magazine, and Paul was just kind of starting out. Well, he'd probably been tattooing for about 4 years at that point or something. But I saw that article. I'm like, man, I got to go out to New Jersey and get tattooed by this guy. It's exactly the kind of stuff I was looking for to get tattooed on me. So I went out there and got a full back piece from Paul. It was my first tattoo, my first like real tattoo, 6 months later, I went out and he did my whole left sleeve and reworked the stuff I had on my bicep. But in the meantime, I had started drawing again because I hadn't done any kind of art since high school, since I was like 18. So now I was like 30, 31, and I started drawing again. And my ex-wife at the time suggested taking an art class at Macomb Community College, because I had a day job making kitchen countertops, and I was playing in bands at that time and stuff too. But for 15 years, I made kitchen countertops before I actually started tattooing. So about 3 years before I started, I took 3 art classes, one a semester, basic drawing 1, and I had so much fun with that. I took basic drawing 2 the next semester, and then a life drawing class after that. And for 3 years, I was like drawing. Yeah, I fell in love with drawing again, but I still wasn't thinking about tattooing for some reason until around that 3rd year. Just not sure I could do it. It just seemed that kind of out of reach for some reason. But so after about 3 solid years, I'm like, okay, I have to learn how to tattoo. I hated my job, I was there 15 years. I didn't want to be there the rest of my life. And so I got an apprenticeship at Eternal Tattoos, and 3-month apprenticeship, and I was tattooing full time, and it was the best thing I ever did. Tom Renshaw was working there at the time, and Tom, and in 1997, he was like the best black and gray portrait tattooer in the world, I think.
Well, he certainly like changed, I think, what portraiture was. I mean, we didn't have very many people that even attempted it back then. You had Jack Rudy, who had kind of laid the groundwork for the fine line style, but he tended to do more stylized faces. Like it's been a long time since he's done a realistic portrait, although I remember seeing a couple nice photoreal portraits that he'd done way back when I got started. But yeah, it just wasn't something that was that available. And so Tom was, he was doing wildlife also, so he was just showing that you could translate photos to skin beautifully, and he was a real pioneer in that way.
Yeah, he took it was like Jack Rudy and Brian Everett were the 2 American guys. Then you had like Darren Stairs in England, Tintin in France, Philip Liu, and yourself. You as well.
Done a few.
Yeah, you did amazing portraits, bro. You and Paul Booth, were you did portraits every now and then.
Yep.
But when you did them,
Metallica, I did the Three Stooges. I did a few fun ones like that, and but yeah, it was like I could only approach it from a classic tattooist viewpoint, because I didn't know, like I would trace out a real simple stencil of the face. Like now I see how realists do it, and they're doing contour lines and the shaded areas, and their approach is going to be so much different, and I'd plug in and just do this medium gray line, I mean, very much like rooted in that. Like I refer to it as the Cliff Raven Foundation, because Cliff was who had apprenticed the guy that taught me. And,
wow.
So I had that, and also I hung out a bit with Dennis Dwyer, who had also worked with Cliff, and he had always shared a lot of that with me as well. And so I'm always kind of interested in like the Cliff Raven history, but his approach to lining and shading, like to this day, I can't shake it. You know what I mean? And no matter how far out I go, if I'm using photo references, whatever, there's always those particular considerations of having backlighting under your shading, and things like that. And, negative sort of alternations. It's very hard for me to break free of that.
Yeah.
Any portraits that I do are going to be sort of realistic, but always filtered through that.
Yeah, right.
Makes sense.
That's your style,
Yeah, I guess so, and I just can't put it away, no matter how hard I try.
Yeah. I mean, I'm pretty set in my ways too. We're always trying to progress and learn and stuff, but there's a lot of stuff I kind of.
So I'm curious to know, as an artist, as a long stretch black and gray tattoo artist, right? You kind of settled into this particular niche early on, and so looking at your work back then versus now, especially your healed work, I mean, you can see that like the number one thing is that the mastering of the control of your values, you know, having that whole value range in there, the blacks, the deep grays, the medium grays, the light grays, having them all heal and settle in there in a way that it looks really full, you know, and I think that that is one of the things that stands out with your work. And that's also one of the things that, like, looking at your early work, which already you had a mind for that, but then comparing that to your work now, I would say that that's, and probably just from being rooted in that style all the time, and all that repetition, but clearly you must be thinking about it too, because if you don't think about it, I don't think you can evolve.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think my work's, I've gotten a little bit darker over the years. I don't know if that's, I mean, I look at the portraits, it was kind of, I haven't got darker. Maybe it's my intense ink that I'm using. My signature set feels really rich and nice. And I mean, I use Pelican for my first 15 years tattooing and stuff. Yeah. But I see some older stuff that's like 20 years old. I run into somebody and it's like it's really light, you know. But then I see someone just as old and it still looks really good for a 20-year-old tattoo. So
well,
I think
it's the same frustration that color artists have, believe me. You know, it's like,
yeah,
there's no universal rule by which it all ages. Like, you know, the same pigments, you know, put in the same year on two different people that, you know, they might even get about the same amount of sun, but it's just so different how it settles. And
it's
I
just
wish there was a way of having more control over it, but that's part of what makes tattooing the living art form that it is.
Yeah. You think it's just skin types? Some people hold it better, or?
Yeah, I mean, it could have to do with, like, some people are more olive and some people are more pink and some people are a little more orange, and so like an olive person, greens don't look that good on, or don't look that bright because they're already slightly green, but oranges and reds sometimes stand out nicely if they're not too dark, right? And then somebody who's more in the pink end of the range, oranges might just look flat, where greens will pop out a lot more. So, but you know, I wouldn't necessarily apply that as a rule either. You know, I think that it would be possible, and I know this guy Killian Moon, who is working on this, having like a color picker almost, where you are able to take the person's skin tone and then you use a transparency filter to see how the different colors, because, you know, all different tattoo pigments are ultimately translucent, and some of the person's natural skin tone is coming through. So you would see how that color might look settle on that skin tone, right? And you can see some of them look great and some of them might look dull. You know, like on some skin tones, blue turns gray, you know? So that's always a hard one. You know, aging is always a hard one for tattoos. I guess that's one of the reasons why people are attracted to black and gray.
Yeah, it's easy.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that, but the aging is a little bit less unpredictable.
That's true. Yeah. Sorry, man. I'm pouring some coffee.
Yeah, I would if I had any. I just drank the last thick tarry dregs of mine. What do you do? But yeah, man. So I would love to be able to talk about all this stuff, and then by the end of our conversation, have a few really concrete goals to give people with our exercise, right? And say, okay, here's a body part. Let's say, you know, a horror face of some sort. We can have some particulars with some maybe cool elements around it to just, you know, atmospheric elements to kind of, you know, frame it off or whatever, and have it sit nicely on the body, and have some specific goals of what that drawing is going to look like. And they'll have 3 days, 2-3 days to do it, and we'll get back together and review their drawings and talk about how they can make them even better, and give everybody something that they can then later on go back to the tattoo studio in a month or two and have new things that they can right away apply to their work.
Yeah. No, that sounds great, man.
Well, anything else that you want to say about? I mean, you've done a little bit of teaching. Is there anything that you've felt has been some of the most important take homes that you've wanted to make sure people kind of get when you're teaching a seminar?
Well, if it's like portrait work, or if like realism and stuff, and especially if it's somebody who's hasn't done much of it, they're trying to get into it, I always say like pencil is the closest thing to black and gray tattooing, and if you haven't done a portrait on somebody, and you want to, but you don't feel you're ready or something, I always tell people pencil on paper is the best practice you can get. And you can make a stencil like you would if you're doing a portrait tattoo. That's what whatever photo person I'm doing, or even a photorealistic skull, like a real human skull or something. But you make your stencil like you would for a tattoo, and then I put that on a light box and I lightly trace it onto the piece of paper I'm doing the drawing on, and I approach it like a tattoo. Except it's when I do a portrait, I'm starting from the bottom and working my way up because I'm not outlining everything. I'm starting off with a 7 mag or whatever, and shading, and you work your way up only because you don't want to wipe the stencil away.
Right.
So that's the process for a black and gray tattoo portrait. So it's the same with on paper, except I'm doing the opposite. I'm left-handed, so I'm starting in the top right area. Okay. Actually, you know what? I don't always do that. When I'm doing a drawing, I just put a piece of paper over my hand and
Yeah.
just work wherever. So
Right. Yeah. And try not to smudge things the same way that when you're tattooing, you're trying not to smudge a stencil. It might not be the exact same order of events, but you still have to think about it.
yeah, yeah,
But yeah, that's solid. I mean, I think that if you can successfully render something in pencil, starting with something like a tattoo stencil, you should be able to directly translate that as a tattoo or on the skin. Absolutely.
yeah. You can do it on paper and make it look realistic, and you're happy with it. You can totally translate that to skin. It's in your head. It's in your brain. It's the same process. I mean, it's a lot harder to tattoo than draw
Yeah.
pencil on paper, but it's the same process. It's the same idea, and
You have to wrap
for,
your mind around the photo in a very similar way.
yeah, yeah. And you know what? Also, like if someone wants to do portraits on skin, and they haven't yet, I say the best practice for that on skin is to do like a portrait of a human skull. And if
Right.
you can pull off a skull on skin and it looks like the picture, it's the same thing. It's a portrait of a skull. But
Right.
it's hard to fuck up a skull. Well, you can fuck up a skull, but it's
Yeah,
harder
yeah.
to fuck up a skull than somebody's kid.
Yeah, well, I
Or
mean, you're
something.
talking about facial expression. So with the skull, that gives you a chance to very carefully try to duplicate a photo exactly, and hopefully you could take that photo of somebody's kid, and if there's a few lines slightly off in the skull, obviously it's not going to be an issue. But there's a few
Right,
lines slightly off in that person's kid, they'll notice.
right.
But yeah, the first time I laid a tattoo machine to skin, it was a Greg Irons dragon skull, and yeah, it was wiggly as hell, but it looked like it belonged that way, right?
Yeah. That's awesome. Greg Irons, man.
Oh,
I haven't
hell
heard
yeah.
that name in a while.
Yeah, he was one of the best, one of my favorites. I'm going to have kind of a list of questions and stuff that I'm going to send you away with suggestions for photo material. And I know we've already kind of gone over a bit of this now. Formal, it'll be a little bit personal, conversational, and people have a chance to submit questions too. So we want it to feel very community based.
Yeah, yeah. Cool. That's awesome.